Hi, I'm Keith McCullough. Welcome back to another Real Conversation where I'm excited to have Danielle DiMartino Booth, who is the founder of Money Strong. She's an author of a book I quite like with a great title called Fed Up. She worked on Wall Street, Credit Suisse, DLJ. I worked on one of those too. And she's also a longtime advisor, was a longtime advisor to the Dallas Fed, where I think you developed a lot of your views, didn't you, Danielle?
I certainly developed I would think all of my views on the Fed and then some while I was on the inside.
Yeah, some of the things that you've written, just so, for people that, and I'd highly encourage people who have not yet bought your book to obviously do that and get an insider's view. Like, some of the words you use are just awesome, like group stink. You're obviously not fond of everyone being a PhD. Could you kind of just give your vantage point on this whole affair?
Sure. For me, it was a matter of when I entered the Fed, I was kind of daunted. I was really impressed by all of these brilliant people. On the other hand, the world as we knew it at the time was kind of crashing and burning, and the housing market was rolling over, and Bear Stearns had blown up, and it felt a lot like a hospital. Nobody was really worried. Even though the only thing that resembled a true hospital was the fact that they called each other doctor, which I never did quite get used to because they could never write me a prescription.
So you were there for almost 10 years. I mean, this wasn't like just had a cup of coffee with the Dallas Fed, and obviously Fisher, who ran the Dallas Fed, is quite fond of your viewpoints, and he found you on his own, did he, or did you find him?
He found me. It was a funny conversation we had. He called me when I was in the newsroom. When I left Wall Street, I signed a non-compete and agreed to leave the industry for a while. I guess I'd been overly influenced by Michael Lewis's Liar's Poker and the whole idea of equities in Dallas. And so I went off and wrote a business column and said scathing things about Alan Greenspan and systemic risk and subprime mortgages. And lo and behold, my phone rings one day, and it's Bunny Harmon for Richard Fisher. And I'm like, who on earth in this day and age does not make his own phone calls? It would be the man I came to call boss.
That's cool. Now, how would you compare him to what you call these theoretical economists?
Favorably? Is that a rhetorical question?
No, I mean,
no. We both had our MBAs in finance. We both saw the world through the prism of the markets and had a healthy appreciation for the markets, but didn't think that the market should dictate monetary policy. And generally speaking, you say stock market to a PhD economist, and it's like saying boo on Halloween. They get all freaked out. Did somebody say correction? So he and I were definitely of like minds in that the market should not be the tail that wags the dog.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the people like me, I'm a market practitioner, obviously. I guess we're poo-pooed because we don't have our PhD, but I've kind of grown up. I think we all have to at some point. God willing, that's a positive exercise. But you go through. I went through this, and we bought a company called Potomac Research, and in that acquisition, Don Cohn was part of the acquisition on the advisory side.
Yep.
And there's a very big difference between what I do and what he does. I wonder if there's a point where eventually there's a bridge that's made, there's a handshake, there's an acknowledgement of people like us and what it is that they do so that we can progress.
I hope that that's the case. It was interesting. The Wall Street Journal asked Jeffrey Lacker shortly after the book came out. And Jeffrey Lacker is considered to be one of the more hawkish individuals, Fed leaders, and with I think, a healthy appreciation for the markets. And his answer was, they were like, what do you think of the beef that she has with the Fed? And his answer was, I don't get it.
Really?
I don't get it.
Well, a lot of these people, they're not allowed to get it, right? Because ostensibly you get a PhD, you win a Nobel Prize because you said something, you just can't change your mind. Do you think
yes, it's definitely a gentleman's and gentlewoman's club, obviously, given the fair chair. But by the same token, they've come under tremendous scrutiny and criticism, and I would say rightly so. This isn't just from me. And I think that the first step should be an acknowledgement of their fallibility and the fact that they really are all espousing one school of economic thought that would make even Keynes rotate in his grave. Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, he would actually change as some of the data would change. So, I mean, you look at these people for what they are. At the end of the day, though, they're wrong 70% of their time in their forecasts. I think that they're quite unpopular. When you look forward, at these Trump appointments, just use that for one. Do you think that there's a big opportunity to kind of have a big smackdown change right away?
Look, I think that Trump's first shot across the bow, if you will, was making the head of the Council of Economic Advisors not be a permanent position in his cabinet.
Right.
Because he just couldn't get comfortable with all the academic candidates who were being thrown his way. So he's not said a one word about the Fed, which really makes you think that somebody has amputated his index finger. But he hasn't said a word, and that really the only evidence that we have is what he didn't do with the CEA, and that implies that Cohn and Mnuchin are busily looking for candidates who happen to reside with you and me on planet Earth.
Well, that could be you, by the way. I'm sure you're aware of that. But you look at, I mean, Gary Cohn. We have a team in Washington. We're very much plugged into this. I mean, he's already ruffling feathers with the guys that Trump appointed. He had this big kind of, wouldn't say argument, but the way he's transactional and he's dealing with like price on repeal and replace, and price is more academic. You just can't handle it. Do you think that a Gary Cohn type of just kind of an operating strategy for the Fed would be possible?
So I don't know how much of the book you read, but one of my favorite moments when I was inside the Fed was one of my former assistants stormed into my office. She slammed the door and she said, "Look at this annual review." I said, "Well, God, you're the most productive person in the building except for me." And she said, "I know, and I've been called out for it. And I've been slapped on the wrist by management because I intimidate my superiors because I'm overly productive." And I said, "What?" Look, I think that accountability and productivity would be some welcome additions at the Fed. It is a cushy position that you can get for life, by the way.
Well, they look like most of them have been there for life. Now, if you look at...
We do dust the people. I mean, well, they dust the people.
Well, one of your recommendations in your book is actually about term limits. I mean, you have multiple recommendations. I want to kind of go through what you think the most actionable ones are. I obviously know what they are, but I mean, just for people who haven't heard you speak before, maybe you take a shot at that.
Sure, of course. Look, I think the Fed has come under scrutiny because of mission creep in recent years. It constantly says, gee, if Congress would just do its job, then we wouldn't have to do all this heavy lifting. I say hooey to that. If it takes an act of Congress, we've got a one-party, we're theoretically capable of getting past gridlock. If it takes an act of Congress to reduce the Fed's mandate back down to just minimizing inflation, take the labor mandate out of the equation, put it back in the hands of the private sector, admit that what was done in 1977 was wrong. That's A. B, we're no longer a nation that we were in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was originally conceived. It was the wild, wild west out in California. Look, Janet Yellen watched the subprime bubble blow up on her watch. It's fair to say, and I've blasphemy, we need a little bit more bureaucracy out on the West Coast, or at least more eyes and ears. While you're adding one on the West Coast, no offense to anybody in Minneapolis, St. Louis, Cleveland, they could theoretically, economically be absorbed into Chicago and save the taxpayers a lot of money. So I would take it down to 10 districts. And last I checked, Texas and California, they don't rotate out of economic relevance every 3 years. Give every district a permanent vote. And in that way, you start to dissipate some of the power base that is in New York and Washington, D.C., that I think are what would have sown the seeds of corruption at the Fed and made it an overly entrenched academic-led institution.
Now, if you look at that power, Dudley's power, New York Fed power, how did you encounter that, you and Fisher?
Well, again, Fisher and I both held our MBAs in finance, and we had a healthy appreciation for sell-side research, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It reads a certain way. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things he noted when he started at the Fed was that the research coming out of the New York Fed off of its markets desk, which is mandated to provide markets intelligence to the system, that it read a lot like sell-side research. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, that doesn't seem right. So what he did that was so unorthodox in bringing me into the Fed was establish his own markets desk inside the Dallas Fed. Before every FOMC meeting, I would go off to New York. I would meet with the same people my counterparts in New York were meeting on the trading desks, but somehow, some way come away with a vastly different conclusion. And that's why when Richard Fisher is asked publicly, who the heck is this woman? Where have you been hiding her? His standard answer is she was my secret weapon. Yeah. She made sure that I walked into the meetings armed and dangerous with much more objective markets intelligence.
Now on that,
I can tell you, I'm on Bill Dudley's Christmas card list. No, I'm not.
He actually, he was kind enough to invite me and my one of my colleagues, Darius Dale, to go present to the New York Fed. It was a very interesting meeting because our research process, or an independent research process, I think the buy side's process, I'm sure that these are all where you get market intelligence. You wouldn't ask somebody who's wrong 80% of the time. But they were trying to understand what it is that we do, and I wonder. I love your recommendations. I think term limits and reducing the power centers in New York Fed. I think that's all great ideas. But the core of it to me, and I wonder if you agree or disagree, is like, what is the research process and what are the outside opinions that have their own research process? Like, is that where you can really get a lot done?
Did you say outside?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned the New York Fed, and in one of the last chapters of the book, I go through the task force that was brought into the New York Fed to try and determine why they did not see the crisis coming when it blew up in their backyard, on the balance sheet, off the balance sheets, obviously, of these huge banks that were so over leveraged. And the determination of the task force was the following: there's no ability to dissent inside the organization.
Right.
In the research department, even on the markets desk, there was banking and supervision, and really the task force concentrated on the banking and supervision side of the organization, but the way it read resonated so much with me because it was endemic of the entire organization, and the ability to raise your hand and say no was simply unwelcome.
I mean, it's like an insider's view of its own view. It's like pure navel gazing, is what it appears to be to me. But if we get to a better place, I mean, there is an option. 5 or 6 open seats. There is a chance here that we could be in a very different. Certainly, from my career's perspective, I mean, I had to deal with this the whole way. In particular with Bernanke and Yellen, which is absolutely annoying. It annoys a lot of portfolio managers, a lot of people in the marketplace, that they had to kind of read the tea leaves of these people all of the time. And is there a moment here where this could actually, in 6 months, you and I are talking, and this has completely changed?
Maybe not 6 months, but I think by the time June of 18 rolled around, he will, as you pointed out, have had the capability of replacing 6 of the people. I happen to like Jerome Powell, and I'm delighted that he's the only one that it looks like he could stay. Lael Brainerd could theoretically hang on, but rumor has it that she wants to make her way out the door, which might have something to do with the fact that she was openly campaigning by contributing to Hillary Clinton's campaign to be her next Treasury Secretary, but that's a matter of public record. Just saying. No,
again, and what is the level of competence on Lael Brainerd to forecast inflation and/or tell me what's going on in the marketplace? I mean, it's completely useless. I would never. That's the biggest joke from a hedge fund manager's perspective. Most people at the Federal Reserve wouldn't make it past the first interview analytically as a competent buy-side analyst. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. You'd sit there, you'd hear.
This is not to take away any of their brilliance. I mean, they can do calculus in their sleep. I just don't know how practical that is.
Right. I mean, that's that. So let's say we get to next year, you have some sea change, if you will, in terms of the complexion of the Fed. How long do you think we get to a place where something could be rules based, or something that people could actually look? Okay, what is the evaluation process? What's the research process? And can we actually have an objective opinion on this, as opposed to what politicization has told us about the Federal Reserve?
Look, I think the opportunity is absolutely there. I worry about one rule being imposed, because everything I learned about model-based decision-making means that you're not going to incorporate everything you need to into one model. There's no perfect mousetrap.
Right.
Now, that is not to say that more discipline and rules-based methodologies can't be introduced into the Fed. I think it's ripe for that opportunity, and I would certainly advocate for it. But if you were to say it's just going to be the Phillips curve, or it's just going to be Okun's law, or are your eyes rolling in the back of your head?
Yeah.
Or it's just going to be the Taylor rule, I would say no.
Well, yeah,
not just one.
Because that's the number one thing people. I was in Washington, Baltimore the last 2 days. People say, well, Taylor rule, that's going to be implemented immediately if they appoint Taylor. And I kind of try to disagree with it with no
I don't
insider.
even think Taylor would advocate for that.
Right. I mean, is he going to come in with like one fell swoop and say there's one rule? I mean, that's not. You don't think that's practical?
No, but I think that had the Taylor rule been more appreciated inside the organization, if you will, several years ago when Janet Yellen's labor market conditions indicator was screaming, it's time to hike rates. Can we please stop talking about tapering? I think that had somebody like that been there, that a Taylor rule would have been a check and balance against individuals, academics, who refuse to get off the mark and hike rates when rules would have suggested to them that they were already behind the curve. And I think that that's where they can be highly useful tools.
Well, what's interesting about that tool in particular, I mean, Janet Yellen's labor market conditions index, which she herself said was her favorite indicator, the minute that went negative, and it went sustainably negative for 15 months in a row, she just stopped talking about it. So, I mean...
Yeah, I likened it to, and Art Cashin was kind enough to repeat it, I likened it to, she threw out her own baby with the bathwater. It was kind of astonishing to see her go radio silent on her baby that she created.
Ay, ay, ay. I mean, one of the...
And look at what's happening now. I mean, you're watching peak car sales, inflation adjusted income is flat as a pancake, and right now they're getting all hawkish and ready to embark upon an aggressive tightening campaign. And they wonder why people suggest that they're political.
Yeah, it's just called style drift. I mean, you're constantly changing what you're doing, and nobody wants anything to do with that. If you look at that now, I mean, we just had Fed Fund futures go. I've watched this for a long time, but to see them 2 weeks ago, Fed Fund futures on the March hike were 34%. Now they're approaching 85% this morning. 2 weeks later, do you think that was expected?
No, but I'm not sure if the market is this intelligent, because I wasn't. I used to think that the vice chair at the Fed was Stanley Fischer.
Right.
I'm wrong. He's vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. But if Janet Yellen gets into a car accident and doesn't make it to the Federal Open Market Committee, who is the vice chairman of the Federal Open Market Committee? Who directs interest rate policy in her absence? That would be one Bill Dudley.
Exactly.
So when he comes out and says, you know what, I think it's time, it's ready, we're ready, it's all good, let's go. If he's saying it, and if markets bore the heck out of her, which we know they do, that means that it's a go in March. And I think that was why we've seen the most rapid pricing in of a rate hike that you and I have seen in our careers. It was the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I remember I saw you on an unnamed program talking about it. I mean, I think it was a couple weeks ago, and you're just like, look, this data is going to be the data, and we're going to continue to go forward where that data is. If it's hawkish, they're going to have to raise rates, and if it's not hawkish, then they're not going to raise rates. I mean, if I look at my model, first of all, inflation on a year-over-year basis, just looking at headline, I know the Fed likes to define it otherwise, you could easily be at 3% come April, May. And you could have a GDP that's tracking actually the dog finally catches the fire truck. Like you could have 2.5 to 3% GDP and the stock market makes new highs every other day. Like, is that an environment where the Fed could possibly even raise by 50 basis points at a time?
I'm going to step back for a second here. Bank of America Merrill Lynch, after today's data came out, they took their GDP forecast for the first quarter down to 1.4%, and this might have even preceded the construction data that was very poor. I think that the signals right now in the economy are very mixed, and therefore what I'm watching is not the runaway short cover rally of all kingdom come gone by in the stock market, but rather the flattening of the yield curve and what it's communicating. And if they were to hike rates by 50 basis points, it would simply be expeditiously putting Trump into recession.
Right. Do you think Janet Yellen, even if the data was approaching something that you considered more hawkish, do you think that Janet Yellen even has it in her to do a 50 basis point hike before she's gone?
It would shock me, but stranger things. And again, if Dudley was advocating for it, I think that she is, I think you can make the case to her about what the market is communicating, because she does not like markets.
Right. No, Dudley obviously is going to call Gary Cohn. I mean, it's not going to be a secret.
Ooh, well, you said that, not me.
So, but how important is this relationship? Because as you pointed out, rightly pointed out, and I think it's one of the more obvious subtleties out there. I mean, you have two Goldman guys, Mnuchin and Cohn, who are two very effective, well accomplished, and know how to generate results type Goldman guys. I mean, these aren't softies. How powerful do you think that they are currently in this whole forward outlook?
Well, I think that they're clearly the two most powerful people when it comes to the economy and finance, especially given the fact that in Trump's eyes, at least, even though the Fed obviously matters, they're not his people
Right.
inside the Fed. So I think that that gives them even more power. You know, one of the interesting things I discovered in researching the book, and in order to get past Penguin Random House's armies of lawyers, there were 100 pages of endnotes and documentation. But one of the things, no lie, trust me, it's like, oh, very painful, right up there with the proctology appointment. But one of the things that I noticed was the FOIA requests that revealed the the magnitude of communications that had gone on between Hank Paulson and Lloyd Blankfein.
Right.
So, I mean, you can draw parallels all you like, but you are absolutely correct. They were all born and raised in the Goldman nursery, and the relationships are there, and the mindset is there, and therefore, you know, the ability to potentially cross lines and introduce conflicts of interest, they're also there. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but again, they all come from the same place.
Yeah, I mean, just going forward, do you think Trump would be best served trying to offset that power center, or they're going to double and triple down on it? I mean, 5 seats, as you know, 6 seats open in the power center that is the Federal Reserve is a wide open net.
I've got a hashtag named for me.
So do you think he's going to offset that, or he's going to try to back that off, or he's just going to let them run free reign?
You know, I look at somebody like Rex Tillerson as a counterpoint to what you're suggesting, and I don't see Trump as letting 2 individuals dictate 6 positions. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would hope that that would not be the case. And again, we need capable individuals. I don't care if they come from Goldman Sachs or Jamie Dimon's company. I really don't care. One of the reasons that the Federal Reserve did not see the crisis coming is because the people on Wall Street spend a lot more money making sure that their folks can get around the regulators. Right. And one of the things I advocate for in the book is, I mean, gosh, this I'm going to start getting death threats. But one of the things that even though PhDs are really not into calling hitmen, but anyways, one of the things I advocate for in the book is that we cut the research staff at the Fed across the board in half, take a whole bunch of money, and hire people and put people in leadership positions that can read a balance sheet.
Right.
I mean, that would be a really good start.
No, I mean,
hey, this is a really complex security. Okay, then it's not going to fit in the model. We won't talk about these warehouses and credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations because we don't understand them. And by the way, the world just blew up on your watch. Mm-hmm. So I really advocate for bringing in brilliant people who understand banks. And while you're at it, you can get rid of all the other banking regulators and save taxpayers even more money, because I think we just need one banking regulator. I think having several of them. My favorite example is that the OCC was shutting down IndyMac while Janet Yellen was trying to extend it a line of credit. Same day, same time. You tell me.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, in a way, I mean, if you want to get people in there that understand the banks and understand, the real story, I mean, Mnuchin and Gary Cohn are well aware. So, I mean, I neither have any problem with Goldman guys. In fact, Goldman guys, Goldman gals, JP Morgan, whatever. I mean, there's plenty of good people in this business that are competent. I at least feel like for the first time that we're getting closer to having a little bit more truth and some more competence there. So, I guess we'll see. I don't know if
but I would only add that that there are several pension funds around the country that have not answered the siren song of putting grandma's money into a private equity distressed real estate fund. and there are CFOs who have actually managed to not only buy back their shares with debt issuance. So put people who've been on the receiving end of Fed policy and skillfully still manage to be efficient operators, put a few other practical people like that on the board as well. The 1913 Federal Reserve Act mandates that President Trump install individuals from a diversity of industries. So I'm not suggesting you should go from one end of the spectrum, pure PhDs, to the other, pure bankers. No, I think we need to have a wealth of people from different backgrounds.
I think that's a great
leading the Fed.
that's a great recommendation. That would be consistent with what Trump's done in other components of his administration. So you mentioned Jerome Powell. There's like John Allison's a great example. He's a CEO of a big bank. He did things a lot differently than a lot of other bankers. I mean, do you think a guy like
good, and he lived to tell.
Do you think that he's a legitimate rumor, or he's considering this?
Oh, I don't think. I mean, we don't know from day to day Trump's relationship with the media, but I think there are savvy enough people in his world that make sure that they're not going to leak names,
right,
if they're not legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, our short list would have Kevin Warsh, you have Taylor, you have Jerome Powell, you have John Allison. That came up the other day.
I'm waiting for. You're missing somebody.
I'm probably missing like five.
His name's been in the paper. I used to call him Boss.
Oh yeah, Fisher. Right. Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, his name's popped up there. Do you know what? Coincidentally, since the book came out.
Nice. I like that. Well, I mean, this is the bridge we still need to build, and maybe it's just something to end on here. I mean, I still think, in as much as you're dead on about being fed up and these PhDs with horrendous track records running the damn thing, with navel gazing being their fundamental behavioral premise. I mean, I still think there's
You're going to give me that picture all day long. Thank you.
There's still an opportunity here where the journalistic community, I affectionately call it old wall media, but they're equally as bad. I mean, these people are as clueless as the day is long. Unlike a lot of these PhDs, they're actually not that smart. They think they know more than what they know, and they spend all day asking thoughtful people like you questions, but they're guided questions. They're political questions.
Yep.
What do you think? What do you think about that? I mean, and I don't want you to. Obviously, you're doing quite well with your media presence, but what do you think about that component of Fed analysis and the political biases associated with old wall media journalists?
So, I actually had my second master's in journalism from Columbia, and I was part of the Reuters Forum, and I'm a huge advocate for journalists who cover the Fed, who cover the markets, who cover the economy, to have training in these fields. Because otherwise you're just trying to sound smart and accomplishing very little in terms of communicating the truth. I think one of the things that's gotten our economy into such dire straits, and one of the reasons that households in particular have been so apt to take the Fed up on its offers of subprime this and subprime that, is that financial literacy is sorely lacking in our culture. And I think the onus is upon those in the financial media to educate themselves first before they ask questions.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer, and it's also you're unlike a lot of people where you actually took the bull by the horns. Pardon the Texas pun, but you're actually doing it, and you're educating a lot of people, and you do have context, you do have experience, you are very competent, beyond competent. So that's a start. So I'm happy we met. I'm glad we had an opportunity to have a good conversation here.
Likewise, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm so excited that I can Skype. I've crossed over some technological barrier.
Oh, we're big on that. We're going to keep evolving over here. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.